Hey guys, we are hanging out in the garden today, and today we're going to talk about loofahs before we get this little cool down that we're going to experience. We've had this absolutely amazing season for loofahs this year, and I'm going to share with you how I grow them and really how easy they are for you to grow. But let's take a look at them because I have a feeling in the next couple of days the weather's going to eliminate them from the garden, and I wanted to show you them before they're gone. So this is my very unintentional patch of loofahs. They're actually strewn all over the garden. Not a single one of them were planted. This is actually a really good example of how they seem to appear in the garden. There was one in here, a critter's gotten into it, they've left the seeds behind, and next year I'll have a lot more loofahs. So what a loofah is really just a really gigantic cucumber. They're in the cucumber family a bit, also in the squash family, but they turn out as a super large looking cucumber. Now when they're small, the juvenile ones, probably something like this, when they're really small, they can be eaten. I've never actually eaten them, so I can't attest to that by any means, but some people swear by it and say they're great. What people typically do is they take these loofahs, they let them dry, and then they extract the insides of them to make a loofah. The sponge that many people often think comes from the ocean is actually from a loofah grown in the garden. Once you dry them, you can easily carve them into pieces, and they make excellent pot scrubbers, or you can use them in the base of a flower vase, and then you can stick stems in them to help hold up the flowers in a vase. You can use them in the bathtub. That's where they're very commonly found, in a bathtub. The only tip I give you is just to make sure that if you're using them on your skin is that you sanitize them on a regular basis. But then after you're done, put them in the compost pile and let them break down naturally. So I find loofahs are probably the single easiest thing I've ever grown. Now, it might be because my conditions are just perfect for loofahs, but they are really easy. I don't fertilize them, I don't water them, and I don't even plant them. I made this rain garden a while back, and all of a sudden this year, I have loofahs growing up into the rain garden. They've just appeared. I don't even know how seeds got down here, but there's loofahs in my rain garden that's nowhere near the actual garden itself. One thing is for sure though, that they do require a long growing season. So if you're in a place like back home in Canada, if you're back there, you'll want to start your seeds indoors. If you're in Mississippi, zone 8B kind of area down in the south here, you can plant them with your typical spring garden. Usually April, May-ish, I put them out. They won't tolerate a frost, so you definitely want to make sure your last frost is done. But put them out after your last frost, and then expect them to be out all the way out. We are now in October. We're in the middle of October, and they're still growing. They will produce that entire time. They will keep producing until that last freeze comes out. You can grow these guys on the ground or up a trellis if you want. They grow like crazy, so you don't really have to worry too much. They'll be happy no matter what. In fact, they're kind of like the friendly kudzu. They will actually take over like a kudzu, but thankfully the winter will kill them off. And underneath you'll find little gourds hidden everywhere. But they do get weedy and take over. This was a tomato plant that it decided to take over, and I just couldn't get back to it. So the loofahs won on this one. In fact, they're so good at growing, I almost put them in a category that they're a little bit invasive because I didn't plant a single one, and I have them in every corner of my garden. Now, critters seem to help them along. If I picked up every single loofah, I wouldn't have a problem. However, there's just so many loofahs. There's so many all over the place that I miss them, and a mouse gets to them before I catch them, and there's seeds everywhere. So they get a little bit out of control. So that's the one downside of a loofah, at least in this climate and environment. And you can use a cattle panel and trellis them for a bit more control, but they're still at times, like I've cleaned them up already in here, but they will grow a little bit chaotically outside of your trellises still. I do not feed them any fertilizers. They're not on any feeding schedule. They might be in an area of a garden that has some like sheep manure or different manures that are blended in. Overall, my garden, each time it's tested, is very low in nitrogen, high in all the other areas. So it is, I do have those as conditions. My pH is usually high, close to neutral. But this prefers supposedly an acidic soil, so 5.5 to 6.5 is the ideal pH for these guys. honestly, I see them outside of that within our gardens. So I really, they like the long growing season, and they like the conditions of the south for sure. They definitely require strong pollination. These guys really have a lot of visitors to the flowers. We have a ton of bees, and the pollinators just love the flowers, even the butterflies. So you do need to make sure that you have really good pollinators. Otherwise, you'd have to hand pollinate them, and they're like a pumpkin. There's a male flower and a female flower, and you could take a Q-tip and go around and pollinate them yourself if you don't have a lot of pollinators. I haven't watered these guys very much either. For the most part, I've let Mother Nature take its course and just water them as the season permits. It's been absolutely dry since pretty much all of September. It's been pretty dry. I think we maybe had 1 or 2 days with a bit of rain. But overall, I don't water them. If I water the garden in general, they might get a little hit, and that's only usually during July and August. But I don't go out of my way to water these guys at all. These are very self-managed. That was a good one. Let go, Libby. You can grow them in a container, but I'd totally expect them to take over and overflow your container. They're going to grow wild. Loofahs get very few pests in general. I do find that it gets some powdery mildew. You can see it a little bit going on some of these here. But it really, like, I haven't treated it. I didn't care if these grew or not, to be honest with you. But the powdery mildew doesn't seem to kill it off. So don't expect it as plant control either. So let's talk about harvesting these guys. So most advice will tell you that they have to dry on the line or dry on the vine. And that isn't entirely totally true. You do have an improved success rate if it dries on the line, but I will pluck many that are still live and green on the vine, let them dry off to the side, and they turn out just fine. So for those of you that have shorter seasons that can't have the ability to let them dry out on the vine, take them and cut them back and put them in a dry space, and a good majority of them will still dry out just fine for you. Some of them might not dry out, and if they get really mushy or if they're really soggy and wet, they're probably not going to dry out. You can toss those ones. They should dry to a point that you will be able to tell for sure that they're fine, they're crispy, and you'll be able to peel back the skin, and we're going to look at that in a second. Here's a look inside the loofah when it's not dried. So there's nothing there that looks at all like the sponge or the black seed that it's used to. Kind of looks just like a cucumber. So this year, with such an abundance of loofahs as well as some gourds, we're drying them out in our barn. So I've just got them set up on a long board, and I pick them as they get different sizes, and you can see here they're drying out just fine. So I'll add these guys that we just picked into the mix and let them dry out. Now this guy is ready. Super dry, he's crispy, he's ready to be harvested. Basically all you have to do is pick off the outer layer, like so, which is my... One thing that you should be aware of when you are growing loofahs is that they are in that realm of the cucurbit family, in with the gourds and all that stuff, and there is such thing as toxic squash. So when you have these wild gourds mixing in the cucurbit family, it's a hard word to say, but if you have them mixing, it can create toxic squash in later harvests if you're saving the seeds. So one thing I never do is I never save my squash seeds. I always purchase my squash seeds because I have an abundance of gourds and loofahs growing, and the last thing I want to do is develop by accident a toxic squash. If you want more information on toxic squash, I have a video on that. I'll put it down in the description as well if you want to learn more about that one, or Google it. There's lots of information about that as well. All right, guys, that's it on loofahs for today. If you want to grow this slightly invasive but easy to grow vegetable yet useful tool, it's definitely a good one to grow if you have a longer growing season. Awesome, you guys. Well, you be friendly, be kind.